Is everyone sitting comfortably? Okay, so it's my great pleasure to be the first to speak at a symposium dedicated to discussing the past, present and future of public events, of public Vikings and the events at which they appear, and particularly so given today's lineup of speakers. We're at the 40-year mark for the JORVIK Viking Festival, and it's this round number anniversary that has suggested the theme for the Richard Hall Symposium 2025. The festival, of course, is just one of many public events that take place across Europe and the wider world to variously reenact, commemorate, or celebrate the Viking moment in history and its people. But it's certainly one of the most enduring. Such a long track record would perhaps suggest that the JORVIK Viking Festival is a known quantity, why it started, who it's for, and what it's all about. And an anniversary invites celebration, with an event such as the one taking place today, or perhaps via a celebratory publication of some sort. And this was my idea for 2025, to publish a pictorial history of the festival, with a representative image for each festival year and a short introductory essay. I've yet to produce a book. The task has proven more challenging than I had anticipated, for reasons that will become clearer in the course of my talk. So this presentation, therefore, stands in, for the moment, for the book. It's a means of sharing some of the imagery that has come to light through my research and the work of colleagues at York Archaeology. But I also hope to achieve something more than I could have through a light-hearted publication of the sort I had in mind. Some analysis of the festival by exploring some of its many aspects within the framework of today's symposium. For its organisers, the organisers of the JORVIK Viking Festival, I would suggest, the complexity of the event, the festival, isn't always apparent, and I include myself in this observation. The job of organising the festival to the high standards that are expected of it tends to keep us too busy to think about it in terms that go beyond the practicalities, health and safety, budgets, the festival as a marketing tool for the JORVIK Viking Centre, etc. So today is a chance to create some space for us to look at it through a different sort of lens. What does the JORVIK Viking Festival mean? I anticipate that in the course of today's presentations we will see that Viking-themed public events produce and hold a multitude of different meanings for their organisers, participants and onlookers, some of which sit comfortably alongside one another, and others of which produce unintended and even challenging effects. This may be true of any spectacle or show on a historical theme, but I wonder if Vikings are an especially potent brand, given how and by whom ownership of and allegiance to that brand is performed in the public arena. I've previously written about the very earliest public Vikings that I've managed to identify in Yorkshire, those populating the Viking float for the pageant procession at the Ripon Millinery Festival of 1886. The illustration here helps us to picture how these outlandish and exotic figures were costumed, but perhaps more interesting than that is a written account of the effect that they produced on the spectators, bearing in mind they were just one group of historical figures within a much larger cast. The author of the contemporary description of the event finds it worthy of note that as this float passed, the shouts of applause which followed almost drowned the strains of the band. We find another early account of pro-Viking enthusiasm at a public event in an observer's account of the 1934 Runnymede pageant, when an over-exuberant crowd in the cheap seats enthusiastically cheered a scene in which the monks of Chertsey Abbey were slaughtered by marauding Vikings. My articles are not the only and not even the first to identify the JORVIK Viking Festival as a cultural artefact that deserves more thorough investigation. They stand upon the shoulders of a field that has emerged more fully over the course of the last 15 or so years, as Vikingisms within the worlds of museums, reenactments and popular entertainment have become the subject of academic research. During this time, I've fielded countless inquiries on the Vikingisms of Jorvik from researchers at various stages in their careers. Two projects with a particular interest in the festival have also dispatched researchers to conduct fieldwork in York in February, most recently in 2025. Against this background, therefore, and in the light of the festival's ongoing importance for York, Make It York estimated in 2018 that it generates £6.6 million for the local economy, my project to produce a pictorial history seemed a modest and straightforward proposal. I've now worked at 22 JORVIK Viking Festivals in a variety of capacities, so I'm familiar with the basics of the festival story and should have little difficulty in converting them into an introductory blurb. So the festival, as we know it, is a large-scale annual event for York, comprising a range of activities themed more or less loosely around the celebration of the city's Viking heritage. It celebrated its 40th anniversary in 2025, having first taken place in 1985, the year after the JORVIK Viking Centre was launched. It takes place during the February half-term and came into existence when the operators of JORVIK noticed a seasonal downturn in visitor numbers at what was at other times of the year a smash hit attraction. Its raison d'etre, therefore, was to stimulate visitor numbers and to generate coverage in the local and national print and broadcast media, producing a publicity effect that was disproportionate to the funding needed to stage it. I recently had the opportunity to interview one of the initiators of the festival, Anthony Gaynor, the JORVIK Viking Centre project director. The majority of our conversation was about the creation of JORVIK, as his interview was one of several combined to make a film celebrating JORVIK's 40th anniversary. But I also took the opportunity to ask him about the festival. Now, the audio on the playback is a little bit faint, but it is all subtitled, so hopefully it will be accessible for everybody.
The thing was, we were looking at the revenue sheets, and as expected, the revenue for the months of January and February was much less than it was in July and August. So the idea came, and I think that Jan Podlewski had quite a bit to do with it, saying there's no point in banging the drum in August. If you're full, you're full. You know, all you're doing is creating a frustrated market. What we've got to do is to try and attract people to those periods of the year where we do have capacity. A bit like airlines. I mean, you know, they discount their seats in January and February because they've got the blooming aeroplane and the crew. They might as well fit it. So that's precisely why we had the idea of a Viking festival, because there wasn't one. It's the old story of you know, where there's a gap, why is there a gap? So I think that we thought about up heliars and setting things on fire, but essentially the creation of the Viking Festival was to stimulate demand in the down season. And there were all sorts of innovative ideas. We had fireworks displays from Clifford's Tower, for God's sake. We set fire to boats, not the fairing, I'm glad to say, on the river. Marches. There are all sorts of people who have reenactment groups all around the country. And I remember waiting for a train to arrive from Aberdeen that was full of absolutely, totally stonked Scotsmen who they got Viking helmets, I mean horned helmets, which was a bit annoying. And they sort of lurched and rolled their way down the platform. We thought, oh my goodness me, what are they going to add to the weekend? But they were good. They turned up and they had torches, and we had torchlight processions, and there were sort of a programme of academic lecturers. And
Okay, so far so straightforward, or so I thought. Either before my conversation with Anthony or during it, I can't recall which, I noticed something strange about the festival's given birth year. The JORVIK Viking Centre opened for the first time in April 1984, so its first poor February must have been in 1985. It follows, therefore, that the first JORVIK Viking Festival must have been in February 1986. This is borne out by the absence, as far as I've been able to see, of any contemporary records of a Viking festival in York in February 1985, compared with a number of records of one sort or another for the February of the following year. The earliest source I've found that alludes to a Viking festival in 1985 is an entry in York Archaeological Trust's 1987-88 annual report, which calls the 1988 festival Jorvik's fourth, and this has been the accepted state of affairs ever since, whenever anyone has had to account for the vintage of the JORVIK Viking Festival. Is this all an error? Incidentally, Anthony couldn't pinpoint from memory the date when the festival had begun, but he thought that it must have been preceded by at least one poor February. It's certainly mostly correct to say that the festival happens every February, but there are exceptions to this rule too. February 2022 saw a shift for the majority of the activity to May, a decision having been made around the time of the Omicron variant of COVID becoming established that attempting to run an in-person festival would be too risky. The 2021 festival, which took place in February while schools in England were locked down, had been a wholly online affair. The experience of 2022, however, was an opportunity to find out more about the direct impact of the festival on visitor numbers to York archaeology attractions, the first such opportunity apparently since 1985 or 1986. In the event, the significance of the festival's impact in 2022 was ambiguous, with no clear change to year-on-year visitor numbers in either February or May. So perhaps the festival doesn't represent the short-term boost to visitor numbers at Jorvik and its sister attractions that we had imagined. So a couple more question marks here. Even the matter of the name given to the festival is open to question. Although the festival is programmed and managed by the staff of York Archaeology and its JORVIK Viking Centre, it is routinely referred to in some quarters as the York Viking Festival, sometimes by those who have their own reasons for understating the degree to which the festival is a Jorvik property. Jorvik itself experimented with alternative naming practices. For 2 years in the mid-1990s, it became the Jorvik Festival, with the Viking elements dropped to allow for a greater range of events to be included. So it turns out that many of the notions that are presented as basic facts by the festival's organisers don't stand up to scrutiny. Does any of this matter to anyone other than someone researching the history of the event, a festival nerd like me? Possibly not. The differences and distinctions that may be drawn are trifling and marginal, after all. What makes them interesting, perhaps, are their implications not only for thinking about the festival in the past, but also for thinking about its meanings and its future. To take the point of a view of a festival organiser, the meaning and purpose of a festival come under closer inspection at times of financial stress, such as that being experienced currently across the heritage tourism sector as a result of the long-term effects of the pandemic lockdowns and the cost of living crisis. In addition, the professionalisation of the events industry and the increasing emphasis on protections against acts of terrorism in public places, given greater urgency by the Manchester Arena bombing of 2017 and the changes in the law prompted by it, place greater operational burdens on any organisation staging a public event. York Archaeology is an educational charity whose work is funded by paid admissions to its visitor attractions and contracts for archaeological clients. Although the festival serves its charitable objectives around education and engagement, it is run at a considerable cost, and its justification, if not on the grounds of demonstrable publicity or marketing gains, must be sought elsewhere. The difficulty in doing this is thrown into sharp relief in an attempt to write its history. As in the case of many public events, shows, performances and pageants, which are experienced fleetingly and in the moment by all but the organisers, which are often patchily evaluated and which until 20 years ago left very little in the way of a digital footprint, it can be difficult to assemble source material. Frustratingly, this isn't just down to a lack of records. Rather, it is because of the nature of the material in question and the difficulty in accessing it. In terms of an official record, York Archaeology's archive, insofar as it relates to the festival, is patchy, in part because of internal restructurings and the involvement in staging the festival of agencies spun off from the original JORVIK Viking Centre project and now no longer a part of York Archaeology, and in part because the festival was run by an external PR agency, on a number of occasions around the year 2000. It's also no doubt the case that a higher value was placed on some aspects of the festival than others, so much went unrecorded and has been forgotten. The most reliable and easily accessed sources are York Archaeological Trust's annual reports, plus the microfilms of local newspapers held at York Library. In addition, York Archaeology holds some printed programmes, though not a full set, a collection of digital images and videos, starting in 2003 and becoming fuller for each festival in the course of the next 2 decades, and some recently digitised VHS videos featuring TV items from local news bulletins or daytime magazine shows, as well as footage captured by its own in-house photographer. We can only imagine the wealth of photographic prints, correspondence, scrapbooks and other ephemera out there, generated by festival goers or festival workers, and as yet unidentified and uncatalogued. Also largely untapped are the memories of participants, given that every festival is still well within the scope of living memory, which could find expression in oral histories, such as that provided earlier in this presentation by Anthony Gaynor. This is a pity for those of us concerned with public Vikings and Vikingisms, as the JORVIK Viking Festival offers the potential for an annual check-up on how they're doing, and a chance to gain some insights into how their treatment has evolved over the years. There has been a recent development that has opened a new window on festivals in years gone by, however. York Archaeology has recently digitised its collection of photographic slides produced between its inception in 1972 and the early 2000s. These slides were used to record and communicate the archaeological, museological and community activities of the Trust. The collection contains 57,460 slides, though more are being brought to light as the archive continues to be catalogued. There is a searchable online catalogue for anyone who might be interested, and JORVIK Viking Festival is included as a subject heading. This digitisation project has brought to light all manner of imagery from the last 40 years, a rich resource for thinking about the festival, its iconography and its meanings. Here is an image of a gathering of Vikings on King's Staith in 1986. You will see that the slide bears an individual number written in marker pen. The first 2 digits give the year in which it was taken. This inscription can be useful in pinpointing an event, as the digitisation process inevitably has led to some images being catalogued incorrectly, a hazard of processing slides stored in non-archival plastic hanging sleeves filling more than 30 filing cabinet drawers. Returning to the matter of when the festival began, something clearly did take place in 1985, if the inscription on these slides is to be relied upon. A regatta of Viking boats on the Ouse was a feature of the festival up until 2006, and these images seem to capture something of the sort. But we can see from the trees in leaf that this event didn't take place in the February. The answers came from a long-time supporter of the festival, the Norwegian Trond Svensson. I first knew Trond as someone who visited York fairly regularly, sometimes at the head of a group of Norwegians, connected in some instances with Norwegian museums or tourism bodies, most often during the festival. In talking to him, it became clear how invested a Norwegian contingent had been in the first 2 decades of the Viking Festival, and how influential it was on the shape that it took during that time. Trond's involvement initially centred on activities on the river. He gave me this account of how the festival began. And these are Trond's words. In the summer of 1985, 4 boats from Norway headed upriver on the Ouse. On the last part of the river into York and King's Staith, the sails were up and we sailed against the slack current. On board the boats were also school children from York. That certainly wouldn't happen nowadays. The group was led by the maritime historian Olaf Tiengvig and his crew with Hitra, Freya and Rain, and I with my family on board the fairing Ormen. Earlier, one of Olaf's fairings was smashed against a bridge pillar and ruined. The city was on its feet with the civic party and several TV crews. On King's Staith, gifts from Norway were handed over to representatives from the city and York Archaeological Trust, cardigans, sweaters and eiderowns. This was the start of the JORVIK Viking Festival. Without a more precise date, I've been unable to track down any coverage in the local newspapers, though it must exist. York Archaeology's archives and annual reports are silent on the event, though there is mention of Engvig coming back in subsequent summers and for subsequent festivals. Viking boats on the river are now a thing of the past, with the regatta abandoned after 2006 due to the administrative and operational burden that it placed on festival organisers, juggling competing demands on their attention. During its time, wooden boats from Norway and the Isle of Man competed in rowing competitions with yacht-owned vessels in fiberglass and wood, including the historic vessel Tormodson, gifted to York by Olaf Engvig in 1987. York Archaeology holds some footage of the build-up to the event in 1988. Let's see if we can get this to work. Set alight at the end of a torchlit procession by reenactors. And this footage shows the event in 1992. The last river-borne boat burning happened in 1999, but for a good decade afterwards, festival organisers would be asked each and every February, are you having a boat burning? A compromise was reached in those years when the festival finale battle and firework display was staged at the Knavesmire, the large green space on the outskirts of York, where the public could be kept at a safe distance from the fire with no risk of anyone falling into a river. And sadly, my short film of the 2012 festival finale isn't working, so I have to skip. Oops. Fireworks have on many occasions been launched from Clifford's Tower, shown here before the programme of works that preceded its reopening with enhanced facilities in 2022, and the Castle Museum. But fiery spectacles now tend to be restricted to closely managed dramatic productions or photo shoots, given the challenges of remaining health and safety compliant in large-scale city centre events for the public. It is tempting to romanticise the days when health and safety concerns didn't hold such sway in events provision, until you read the hair-raising accounts of public firework displays of the relatively recent past, when spectators would regularly be struck by falling debris, and those in the know would come kitted out with their own safety goggles. So boats, fire, and boats on fire were all staples of the festival in its first 30 years. Whereas the link with boats seems to have been thanks to Norwegian supporters of the JORVIK project, the long association between the festival and fiery spectacles is perhaps down to the influence of Archaeology, the Shetland Viking Festival, whose squad came to York in February 1986 and 1987, as recalled by Anthony Gaynor. Norse mythology has also provided some of the inspiration. Theatrical productions have featured alongside the open-air events. Ragnarok, staged in York Minster in 1988 and the Guildhall in 1989, was conceived as a Viking counterpart to the city's mystery plays. At other times, the head ransom episode in Egil's saga has provided the inspiration, including in productions in 2 consecutive years of Egil Skallagrimsson Keeps His Head by North Country Theatre. The EU-funded Follow the Vikings roadshow was partly inspired by the head ransom and was performed live between 2017 and 2019 at 11 significant Viking locations in 7 different countries, concluding at the JORVIK Viking Festival. Myth and legend have become more prominent in recent years, supplanting to an extent the historical reenactments, possibly as the mythological material is perceived as more audience-friendly, familiar or accessible, and allows for the inclusion of more fanciful elements. A recent example of this was in 2025 with the release of a Top Trumps card set inspired by Norse mythology, designed by York Archaeology staff and promoted via a city's trail during the festival week. Over the years, however, the festival programme has more frequently been arranged around a particular historical or semi-legendary event or theme, normally local in flavour, with the capture of the city by the Great Viking Army, the wedding of the sister of Athelstan to the Viking King of York, Sihtric, Eric Bloodaxe's coronation or expulsion, the battles of Fulford and Stamford Bridge, and the aftermath of the Battle of Hastings being recurring examples of this. This has provided a platform for reenactors to add authentic Viking colour to the proceedings, with the bulk of the presence over the last 40 years being provided by the Regia Anglorum group, who replaced a group called the Sea Wolves early on in the festival's history. And nowadays, multiple reenactment groups are involved. One interesting exercise that might be attempted by someone with an in-depth understanding of reenactment kit would be to compare and contrast what the fashionable Viking about town was wearing in, say, 2025 and 1986. To my inexpert eye, the outward appearance of the reenactors has remained relatively consistent across my years of association with the festival. At their most conspicuous in a march across the city and a battle finale, they are mostly male, white, and kitted out in the sort of gear that would have marked them out as being high-status warriors in the early medieval period. And here we've got some images of them across the years. Battles at the Eye of York in 86 and 88. You certainly wouldn't encourage people to sit on the mound beneath Clifford's Tower nowadays. And there they are again in 1989. Regia values authenticity in its presentation of the Viking past very highly, and its take on Viking-era material culture, particularly in the personal costumes and kit of its members, has informed the appearance of the festival's Viking world more than any other factor in the last 40 years. What has become more apparent of late, however, is that unaffiliated Vikings with their own take on the Viking aesthetic are at large, and not only at events for which dressing up is encouraged. The festival has developed into a space in which different niche communities, centred on different professional and leisure time pursuits, mix and mingle. The heavy metal fans with the reenactors, the cosplayers with the role-playing fraternity, the mead drinkers with the tattoo enthusiasts. The festival programme has become a broad church of events staged by its organisers and fringe partners. There are the countless casual attendees too, those who intentionally or unintentionally engage in some way with festival activity during their time in York. It is easy to forget when you're in the thick of organising the gathering for the March in Dean's Park next to the Minster, for instance, that there are people around who stumble upon the festival with no prior knowledge that it is taking place, as was the case with several who approached me to ask what on earth was happening as the Vikings mustered. These are surely some of the most important festival participants from an outreach and public benefit perspective, the unwitting bystanders who are captured in the moment and hopefully inspired to find out more. Mention should also be made of the free-to-attend events staged for family audiences and the schools and community engagement work centred on the festival. Although squeezed in periods of financial difficulty, to my mind they are crucial to any case for the festival's continuation. To give a couple of examples of this, Sheffield MenCap and Gateway's adult service members enjoyed a couple of outreach sessions on a Viking theme in January 2024, inspiring their drama, woodworking, creative writing and sports groups, and more besides, to produce their own creative responses to the Viking past and to curate the outputs in liaison with the York Archaeology exhibitions team. The resulting exhibition went on display in our big attraction for the duration of the Viking Festival. This particular partnership was a one-off, but is representative of the sorts of projects that have been inspired by the festival in other years. An annual event is the Blood Axe Book Challenge, run in collaboration with York Explore Library. It's an initiative designed to promote literacy and reading for pleasure for the children of York, who sign up at their local library, then read 4 or more books, collecting stickers and being rewarded with a certificate on completion of the challenge. In addition, they receive a free pass to visit Jorvik and are invited to a special free-to-attend event with the Blood Axe Book Challenge author on the Wednesday of the festival. The challenge has been run for over a decade now and has attracted some big names in children's Viking-themed fiction, including Cressida Cowell, who was the first Blood Axe author, Jeremy Strong, Francesca Simon, author of the Horrid Henry series, twice, and the up-and-coming Louis Stoll, who is currently enjoying huge popularity and who returned to provide another event in partnership with us and the library in April of this year. So to conclude, whether the JORVIK Viking Festival in its 40th, or perhaps its 41st year, who knows which, to say that the festival has loomed large in my life for more than 2 decades is an understatement. But how much value is placed on it by others? A future isn't promised to any heritage attraction or project at times of worldwide instability and economic turmoil, and the festival is always at risk of being taken for granted, even by its regular participants and supporters. Having attempted to sum up the essence of 40 years of festival in just 30 minutes, I leave festival futures as an open question in the hope of provoking some analysis by the panel and audience in the final part of today's programme. I still harbour the ambition to produce a pictorial history of the festival in print. To my mind, this will be a vital step in articulating what the festival is and how its potential may be harnessed for its next 40 years. And now I'd like to hand over to our next speaker of the day, Alison. So I'll just quickly run through my introduction to you, Alison, and I'll pass over the mic so that you can begin. And we'll need to switch the presentation as well. So.